Hello.
Our story begins cruising through space. Two Jedi Knights were in an operation to save the Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. When they arrived, the Battle of Coruscant was underway. The fight was larger than anything these two Jedi had seen in their lives. Kenobi and Skywalker, though, barrel rolled over a Venator and tore down through the ensuing combat. With starfighters engaged in dogfights and cruisers broadsiding each other like tall ships from the high seas, the two Jedi sped their Edgar-class starfighters down the crossroads of battle. Clones were dying by the minute as they strategically placed themselves outside of Coruscant's orbit to protect the capital. Everyone in this fleet knew about the operation and were making adequate adjustments to ensure their successful track through the battle. With a swarm of vulture droids launching from the invisible hand, a squad of clones moved to aid the Jedi in their assault. Quickly, the dogfight for the two Jedi intensified, with them avoiding vultures and barreling through opponents. Skywalker displayed his intense mastery of fighter combat, as his master did most of which could be considered the bare minimum. Success met them until they came across a wing of tri-fighters, who unloaded their torpedoes, overshooting the Jedi but tracking back around to chase them. Kenobi and Skywalker split off. Anakin tried spinning because that was a good trick, and the two torpedoes detonated on impact with each other. Kenobi, on the other hand, slid around the bridge of the Separatist frigate. It didn't loosen their chase. Instead, Obi Wan brilliantly cut the engines, sending the torpedoes into a fray of fire, and releasing what could be seen as miniature balls. But when they tapped against his floating ship, they activated, transforming into Buzz Droids. Obi Wan flipped the engines back on and told R4 to try and take care of them, but his entire starfighter was covered in these psychotic droids. Anakin whipped his ship back around, forcing the yoke forward while pulling the trigger back so he could cut through another fighter in a way, before coming around to Obi Wan's position. His master was struggling, and with flying never having been his strong suit, he was unable to shake these technological terrors. As Kenobi communicated with his apprentice, he told Anakin to go on to save the Chancellor, do what needed to be done to make it out of here. The mission came first, it's why they abandoned the clones, when they typically wouldn't do that. Skywalker was committed to ensuring his master's safety, but that didn't last when the bottom of the ship popped, and Kenobi's head was bounced off the back of the seat, knocking him unconscious. In a similar scenario to the one Anakin faced on Cato Neimoidia with his former apprentice, Obi-Wan was now flying through the air without his astromech and without consciousness. Anakin tried to wake Obi-Wan up, but remembered how Ahsoka saved him. This would be a lot more difficult without R4's help, but he liked his odds. Anakin pulled his ship over, crushing a couple of the Buzz Droids and sending one of them onto his own ship, which R2 would handle. As Skywalker was continuing the pilot next to his master, he called over to a closing-in Venator. He told the captain to prepare the tractor beam. It'd be really hard because of how fast they were flying and how small their vessels were, but the captain stopped all fleet movements and formations to adhere to General Skywalker's request. The two starfighters continued speeding forward as Anakin used the Force to try and stop the fighter from moving so fast. He was attempting to, not all that well, use the Force on the controls on the inside of Kenobi's starship, not slow the ship down itself. But thanks to the Buzz Droids, almost all of the operations inside the fighter were inoperable. Anakin got frustrated as he told R2 to take control over his ship, and he quickly adjusted. The blue astromech piloted around the debris, as Anakin raised both of his hands and raced to save Obi-Wan's life. The Republic captain told Skywalker that they were coming up on them. Prepare for the tractor beam. It would yank Obi-Wan's ship, which could further hurt the Jedi Master, but it was a necessary risk to save his life. When they reached that point, the tractor beam activated, but it overshot and completely missed Obi-Wan's vessel. Anakin was trying to, still, slow Kenobi down, but it failed, and at the last moment, his starship, after the tractor beam missed, slammed straight into the debris of a recently destroyed Separatist battleship. Anakin cried out in shock. His heart fell to pieces in that very moment, and R2 whipped the ship away before they too crashed into the same debris. Anakin did everything within his power, and that still wasn't enough. Because Obi-Wan's controls were completely disabled, there was nothing that he could do to save him aside from the failed tractor beam. Anakin held his head in his hands, as R2 flipped the ship over another barrier in the way. He looked over his shoulder to where his master perished, and the Republic captain, who had been silent in shame, apologized to General Skywalker. They had failed him. Anakin didn't blame the man. It wasn't any of their faults. Skywalker instead decided to blame himself for this because in his mind, he was the most in control over the situation. Ahsoka was able to save him on Cato Neimoidia, and he couldn't save his master here. This was the direct and only comparison Anakin had, and it ate him alive in the very moment. They would still very quickly make their landing procedure inside the invisible hand. A few droids would need to be cut down, but after danger was out of the way, Anakin basically collapsed next to the entrance door that R2 opened. His astromech friend wheeled up to him and buzzed in sadness. Anakin's hands found the droid and he wrapped his arms around R2, telling him quietly that he had failed. The droid tried to give him some reassurance, but Anakin couldn't shake the idea or the fact that everyone he was close to either died or suffered. It ate him apart, but he couldn't focus on that right now. He had to attend to other things. The Chancellor was somewhere inside this ship, and in need of saving. Anakin got up and wiped his eyes, which had withheld his tears relatively well. He then requested that R2 come with him, believing that he'd be safer that way. So, the astromech trailed his master. When they reached the Tower of the Invisible Hand, they found the Chancellor. He was seated with cufflinks on him, and he was glued to a throne room chair. Palpatine smiled at Anakin and welcomed him, wondering why he came alone. Sidious had sensed Kenobi's death, but needed to pick on Anakin. He then suggested that it was very wise of the Jedi to send him alone, despite the loss of his master. Another ruse meant to drive the Jedi and Anakin away from each other. It did work too, because Anakin realized in that moment that neither the Council nor the Jedi generals present at the Battle of Coruscant knew about Kenobi's death yet. Surely they wouldn't allow him to go alone. It would be too dangerous, and they would be right. He couldn't think about that though. Count Dooku was here, and that was something to be concerned with. Skywalker turned around and faced the Count. They had last seen each other on Obadiah, but his powers had doubled since that interaction. Tyrannus taunted young Skywalker, sensing the weight of loss on his mind, and coming to the conclusion that another of his own lineage had been killed. It was Dooku's place to make sure that lineage survived, by turning Skywalker to the dark side, as was instructed by his master prior to this duel. Anakin and Dooku ignited their sabers and steadied themselves towards each other. Their weapons raised over their heads and they dove in, connecting quickly. Flashes of blue and red covered the tower, and behind Anakin, his new master watched in enjoyment. Without Obi-Wan, the duel started very intensely. Tyrannus played off of this. As he backed up the stairs, he defended every strike and blocked Skywalker without struggle, before using the Force to shove Anakin to the ground. Into the room walked General Grievous. They stood over Anakin as Dooku smiled and turned towards his own master to gauge a reaction, which was hard to see at this distance. Sidious was confused and slightly concerned, because he didn't know what was going to happen on the catwalk. But honestly, more than anything, this would prove Skywalker's effectiveness as his future student. Two villains in one battle, and the war would be over. Skywalker would be a hero, and the war could be twisted into a fate that would see the Jedi dying under the breath of Order 66. It was a brilliant master plan that simply adapted with Dooku's twist of fate. It was something Sidious could live with because he knew that Anakin would crush his opponents. Grievous activated his sabers. Dooku slyly and arrogantly introduced a droid general to the weak Jedi Knight, who jumped to his feet. His saber reignited and they engaged, but Grievous got in front of Tyrannus, using this moment to blast Anakin into defense. Their sabers illuminated the walls as slashes and drags cut through objects surrounding them. Anakin wasn't fully comfortable in this defensive position he was put into, so he used the Force to pick Grievous up and lob him at another wall, where he crashed down. Electricity fired from Dooku's hands, and Anakin raised his saber at the last second to defend himself. He pushed back against the heat, as Tyrannus released his assault and Anakin leapt up from the catwalk down to the ground, where Grievous and Dooku moved to corner him. It was here where Sidious implemented his own work of magic. He could sense Anakin's growing power. He was becoming more and more annoyed the longer the duel went on, and with R2 seated next to the Chancellor, they watched in anticipation for who would come out on top. Skywalker bashed away, deflecting strikes from Grievous and parrying Dooku. Sweat built up on his brow as he threw himself backwards and used the Force to shove Tyrannus back, before engaging with Grievous again. Their sabers collided and the droid general was able to pin Anakin backwards, before slashing down with his third arm, now activated, almost killing Skywalker in the blow. Anakin rolled across the ground and Palpatine spoke aloud, gathering everyone's attention. He confirmed something that no one knew, not even the one it was spoken against. He told Skywalker that Dooku had put a hit out on Shmi. He regretfully learned that Dooku had ordered the Tusken Raiders to attack the homestead on Tatooine, in hopes that Anakin would be drawn in and killed by the Raiders. Think about it. The master of Qui-Gon got him killed by siding with Maul. The instructor of Qui-Gon got his grand student killed when Obi-Wan died not more than 30 minutes before. This was his attempt to extinguish the Jedi bloodline he created. Anakin took everything in, thinking about his mother dying in his arms, thinking about Dooku being the one to order that. All of his pain, all of his loss and suffering came from Dooku, and he couldn't actually believe it, not for a moment. But Anakin rose to his feet. Fire was in his heart, and hate was in his eyes. Tyrannus knew this was a lie, but there was no point in rebuting it. Anakin would not listen. Before either Grievous or Dooku could move in, Anakin reached out his hand and Dooku's body slowly lifted off the ground. He felt air leave his lungs as he started to choke. He held his neck in fear as Anakin used all of his power to control Dooku's body. The Sith apprentice's legs hung in the air and kicked, as Grievous slashed his blades at Anakin, who blocked with one hand and continued to take the life from Dooku's body. His hatred was solely focused, and he would make Dooku pay for everything he had taken from him. Tyrannus wheezed as he looked at Sidious, before Grievous finally pushed hard enough, activating his third and fourth sabers and driving Anakin back into a pillar, where he was distracted enough to release Dooku from his grip. The Count heaved on the ground and looked up to Sidious, who smiled at him. The betrayed apprentice moved his lightsaber at Sidious, but with a flick of his hand he was launched off of his feet. Anakin could not see this due to the fray in front of his own eyes, but he could hear the thud of Dooku hitting the ground. Skywalker rolled under another strike, dipping below a third and then jumping up at the last second, before launching Grievous off of his feet with the Force. When he looked up, Palpatine started wheezing in pain. The chair was both a prison but also an electrical chair. The Sith Lord's eyes showed themselves. Anakin didn't think much of it in the moment. He moved to stop Dooku, who was hurting his friend, and then Dooku fired electricity at his opponent, while pressing down harder on the button that activated the electric chair. Sidious tried to free himself, but the restraints on the chair stopped him from using the vast array of powers he had on the chair itself. He cried out for Anakin to save him, but Skywalker was unable to. He tried to use the Force on the chair, but it wouldn't budge. Dooku continued pouring electricity down into Anakin's blade, but his eyes were on Sidious, so Anakin, seeing the distraction, shifted away from the electricity and started running towards Dooku, and as he prepared to leap, he was cut across the back and slammed down into the ground unconscious and in agonizing pain. Sidious was therefore killed, and the invisible hand would make a harrowing escape from the Battle of Coruscant. Anakin would awake days later in a rusted-out cell on Geonosis. The cell was in a pit-like location, one where Dooku liked to keep his most worrisome prisoners. None of them had escaped, and those who did typically were eaten by large monsters or killed by the Geonosis nearby. Inside the pit with Skywalker was General Grievous, accompanied by a number of Magna Guards. He showed Anakin the recent attack at Naboo. Theed was leveled to the ground. Millions of people had been slaughtered, the clones executed on live broadcast, and of course a hologram from Dooku that Skywalker would be allowed to listen to after Grievous left. The droid general, despite his cowardly ways, held all the power here. Skywalker was too weak to walk at this moment, and he was capable of using the Force, but the Magna Guards could stop that by electrocuting him, something Anakin found out the hard way after testing these boundaries. Grievous explained that he would like nothing more than to kill him right now, but as a warrior he wasn't permitted to do that. Instead, he would wait and watch as the galaxy crumbled. The Separatists would win this war, and there was nothing Anakin could do about it. Skywalker tried to respond, but was electrocuted again, and the three droids left, using a transport to ascend the pit and abandon Geonosis for the front lines again, where Anakin would be left to helplessly watch another civilization burn. Dooku's message for Anakin would be punishing. It would reveal that Tyrannus was not in fact behind his mother's death, but there were some things he would be responsible for. Aside from creating the clone army that would wipe out the Republic, he would kill his wife, he would slaughter his apprentice, and he would make everything he loved crumble. It started with Naboo, and then the lynching of the Lars family. These were things done after the message was created, but they were shown to Anakin in the minutes after he listened to Dooku's message, and just within the first hour after waking up, after being unconscious for multiple days. While he didn't specifically care about the Lars family in the slightest, he did feel bad for them. They weren't a part of the story, they had no place here, and yet they paid with their lives. Anakin watched Miss Cott in agony. The Battle of Naboo, more or less the genocide, was replayed for him over and over and over again until the next one came. He would watch the DDT tank used on Meridon and Dathomir demolish the Gungan homeworld, and of course the burning of Theed, which devastated him beyond belief. Anakin was heartbroken, and he didn't know how to reasonably cope with this loss. He worried for his wife and her safety. She wouldn't be leaving the capital at this time of the war, not even after Naboo. The interim Chancellor would not permit that either, but still, she was the largest target because Dooku wanted to hurt Anakin, and honestly, who could blame Dooku? He threw his life away to join the Sith, and then his master tried to pin something he had no hand in against him. This was revenge for Sidious's actions, again having nothing really to do with Anakin, but his burden to bear anyways. Skywalker wasn't permitted to have human interaction inside the pit. Instead, he was given a service droid that would loosely put him back together. If Anakin wanted to help anyone, he'd have to escape the pit, then survive the desert of Geonosis without his Jedi weapon. He wouldn't be able to physically do that at this moment, and Dooku didn't care if he couldn't. It was a nearly impossible task of getting out of the pit with a healed back, because he had to get through the pit, the desert, and then get a starship to get him off of Geonosis. It was a grueling setup, and it permitted Dooku to upset the cosmic balance further by eradicating his greatest threat, and neutralizing the will of the Force by trapping the proclaimed Chosen One in a pit. Anakin wouldn't be able to walk for about 3 weeks. His cut was directly across the middle of his back, and while it wasn't the deepest cut, it was bad enough where he couldn't do anything about it until it was fully healed. The wound itself, once healed, was egregious. It wasn't put together right, which is part of the reason it took so long for him to heal. It was purposely as painfully done as possible. It was truly the gift that kept on giving because it didn't stop hurting him. He regretfully couldn't do anything about that either because he had to live with it. By the time he was able to start walking again, another few societies had been wiped off the galactic map. Anakin couldn't possibly know about the changes to Republic policy or the activation of the Separatist Reserve military, but he could see what the CIS was doing. Some minor details that Anakin was not privy to were the facts that the CIS government had been disbanded. Members who stood up to the regime were either put into prison or killed. Dooku was drawing this out for as long as he could and wanted because he held all the power, and his next target was the Jedi Order. Dooku wanted the impending doom to spread across the Republic. The most recent society wiped off the galactic map was Rhodia. Tyrannus was there himself. He watched people beg for their lives before they were stripped away. General Grievous was leading a counter-campaign against Ki-Adi-Mundi at Megiddo, which was going really well until the Jedi General and the entire 21st Nova Corps was eradicated. The platforms of Megiddo were spared total destruction, but people who resisted would be thrown off. The show of power was unstoppable. The Jedi sent in dozens of commando squads, and they did kill a couple of Separatist allies, or leaders, but Dooku and Grievous remained untouchable. On Coruscant, Padme had given birth to Luke and Leia. It had been enough time by this point, and it was a healthy and happy day. But there was the impending doom that faced the galaxy. Padme knew about the report from the Invisible Hand. The Republic officer who failed to catch Kenobi informed the High Council about Skywalker, and at this point, they were hoping that he had been captured. Dooku only confirmed Palpatine's death. In the background of the recording of which he confirmed it, Anakin's flashback could be seen. It was like a hidden Easter egg, but Anakin moving in his unconscious state confirmed that he was at the very least alive 3 weeks before. This led to Padme doing something relatively unthinkable, but desperation called for it. With Maul returned to Coruscant and Ahsoka working with the Jedi to find her master, Padme needed special forces. So she went to the Republic prison complex and had a heart-to-heart with Barriss Offee. She knew that at one point Anakin and Barriss were friends during their younger years, and this was something that Barriss did confirm. She felt terrible about her actions at the Jedi Temple, seeing how they distanced the people from the Order, and in her mind it led to the genocides on Rhodia, Naboo, and other locations. Barriss was willing to help Padme because of how terribly she felt about everything that transpired since her bombing. The senator would return to her duties inside the Republic Senate, as she posted bail for Barriss, and got her acquainted with Captain Tytho, who got her set up with everything she needed for her mission, including another lightsaber. Barriss was tasked with finding Anakin and bringing him home. As a result, Padme would spare her of any inconvenience she might suffer as a result of being a former terrorist. On Geonosis, Anakin worked as hard as he could, but he couldn't even focus. His mind was a battlefield. He trained rigorously, fighting his own demons so that he could escape this hell and save his wife, his friends, his order, and his republic. It was an impossibly large incline to scale, and that was the point. Dooku knew that this would break Anakin, and it absolutely did. He was delving deeper into the dark side, and he struggled inside of his grips without proper guidance. Anakin had always exhibited uses of the darkness, but they were in small increments. A force choke here, a couple swings of the saber there, nothing super life-changing, but he was constantly in darkness, barely even able to see the light, only interacting with a poorly constructed medical droid and watching the galaxy burn. They replayed the genocides, especially the one in Naboo, and the lynching of the Lars over and again. The screams, the terror, the pain, it was living within his very soul and he couldn't break free from it. Anakin woke up most nights from nightmares, ones where it felt like cold, lifeless hands were crawling all over his body. He internalized these dreams as the souls he had failed, which only weighed him down more. Sometimes he wept, other times he didn't even have enough to cry it out. He was angry often and blamed himself for almost all of it. He should have force-crushed Grievous instead of choking Dooku. That was his avenue to victory, but he may have not saved the Chancellor. Anakin, not realizing that his friend was the real traitor. With days and weeks going by and no one coming for him, he pushed his body until he collapsed. Every time the medical droid found him working out, it would cut back on his food intake, thus leaving him without sufficient nutrients to replenish the muscle he was wearing down. Even with this, Anakin was still dedicated to getting out of this hellhole, and he continued to push himself further so that he could reach out of it. Order 66 was looming on the horizon for Tyrannus. He could feel it inside of his bones. The chance to eradicate the Jedi was upon him. He wanted it so badly, and they were almost begging him to do it at this point. They were so helplessly trying to round the clone armies and navies up so that they could stand a chance, of which none of them truly stood. So Tyrannus, using the Chancellor's frequency, something that Masameda hadn't changed following Palpatine's death, was opened up. Due to the frequency coming from the Chancellor's signal, it was relayed outwards, and the words "Execute Order 66" were spoken into it. Dooku nearly called for Order 65, but a nebula disrupted the connection, which he didn't fully realize. Order 65 would have eradicated the Senate by turning clones against the Republic, but because it never went through, it never truly disrupted any of their processes. The Jedi, on the other hand, got the short end of the stick, but exclusively on Coruscant. The Coruscant Guard and 41st Siege Battalion were the ones to receive the signal, before transmissions off-planet were cut off by Republic personnel. The clones of the 41st Battalion attacked the temple. It would be an all-out assault that would also be shown to Anakin live. As he watched explosions bounce off the sides of the Jedi Temple, with starships launching to counter the attack, he felt rage unlike anything he had ever felt before, and demanded a chance to ascend the pit. He could feel the death. To get out of the pit, one must ascend a constantly angular slope. As you get higher, the rocks pointed more inwards, thus making your ascent harder. Essentially, the higher you got, the closer you would be to army crawling upside down. Anakin couldn't wait though. He barely had the physical strength to walk, but he couldn't keep watching the chaos unfold around the galaxy. The first part of the ascent was relatively seamless. He climbed quickly. He knew that it would only get harder the longer he waited, so he pushed himself relentlessly up the rock, and as his back started to get closer and closer to facing the ground completely behind him, he could feel himself slipping. Anakin, seeing that he might doom himself to fall backwards and destroy his back once more, knew he had to do something. Instead of a cliché slip where pebbles fell down past him, his fingers bursted open from the pressure and he almost fell backwards, but a last-second move saved his life. He smashed his metallic hand into the wall with all of his force and used it as leverage, something that he would use to anchor him out of the pit and into the freedom of the Geonosian desert. Anakin had a long way to go, and he was just getting started on his return. Across the galaxy, in the galactic core, the Jedi were able to repel the assault. Thanks in part to the droid attack on the Wookiees being a successful defense, Master Yoda was able to return to the temple. He was also semi-crucial for the victory, but it was due to the counter-attack led by Master Windu, which used starfighters against LAATs. The Siege Battalion tried to actually besiege the temple, and they were almost successful, with making breaches, but they just didn't lead to long-term success. For example, clones would break through the walls of the exterior of the temple, and then get gutted by temple guards. Hopp killed Grand Inquisitor, and Sindralic defended the temple. Jocasta and Coleman got the younglings out, and with the siege battalions so focused on their singular task, they weren't able to stop the Jedi counter. When managers did move on the structure, Masameda was able to find the right order and issue out 150. He couldn't find it for the longest time, in all fairness to him, but he did save the Jedi because they were necessary for Republic success. That was perhaps the biggest shift following Palpatine's demise. Masameda shifted public favorability of the Jedi because he feared that they might usurp him so that they could finish off the war themselves. But luckily for him, that wasn't ever going to be the case. At the same time, the Separatists were mounting up their attack on the core. Kaden and Modia had fallen by this point, due to the lack of reinforcements, and the CIS needed to retake the Federation operating homeworld. But their attack into the core started with Biss. It was only a matter of time until they found the right path to the Republic capital again. Dooku knew there'd be no point in attempting to take Coruscant at the beginning of this assault. They would win, that wasn't the problem. The problem was the population size on Coruscant. 3 trillion versus a couple million battle droids wasn't exactly great odds. Attacking from the outside of the galactic core and moving in was a better way to crush morale, while also grabbing territory that wouldn't need as much defense. At the same time, Anakin on Geonosis, after struggling through the deserts, accidentally wandered into the underground hive tunnels. It would be a whole thing, some of it including zombie bugs, but the key to this side quest was his discovery. Anakin accidentally stumbled upon a rare crystal. Now, it wasn't totally accidental because the bugs used it as an enchantment artifact. It didn't actually do anything for them because they didn't use the Force, but they prayed to it and used it to wish good fortunes on their queen. The Kyber crystal, though, was an Atan crystal. These were vessels of power that gained strength the longer they were in use, and Skywalker had every intention of using this crystal as a lightsaber. He quickly gathered some parts to create his own retrofit lightsaber, which ended up being very unstable. But it was good enough for him, until it bursted, which it could do. It was a bit like a crossguard because not everything matched up evenly and he was pressed for time when he created it. Not his first choice, but it would have to work. He would steal Poggle the Lesser's shuttle after gutting him, and then depart from Geonosis to the last known whereabouts of his greatest foes. The Jedi and the Republic were on their heels. This would be yet another catastrophic failure, with Republic vessels being overpowered and destroyed. This led to the activation of Palpatine's Star Destroyer project, headed by Captain Tarkin. They wouldn't see action until the next Separatist assault came. It was here at this crucial juncture, at Biss, where Grievous and Dooku would choose their respective routes into the core. They stood inside the Invisible Hand's tower, speaking to one another about their predicament. Because they weren't in the bridge, they never learned about Poggle the Lesser's entry. This was because Poggle was a top Separatist official, and therefore did not need permission to interact with Dooku or approach his vessel. The code Anakin sent was for the bridge, so the captain was obliged to accept. But there was no Poggle, and Anakin quickly exited the shuttle and ran through the corridors of a ship he should have been victorious in. Anakin was still reeling from his losses of Obi Wan and Palpatine, not to mention the uncertain fate of his wife and the rest of the Jedi on Coruscant. Anakin bursted through a door with a force and ascended the elevator shaft, and when he got to the top tower of the Invisible Hand, he saw something that shattered him even more. He was just guessing by coming up here. He had no knowledge that they were at this point in the ship. He just took the best approach to where he thought he'd be successful. When he exited the elevator, he looked at R2's lifeless body. The droid was crushed by Grievous's claws. Anakin quickly opened up R2's head and sighed heavily, before putting his little friend back on the wall and entering the tower chambers. He was going to destroy them. He opened the door and was grateful to see both Grievous and Dooku speaking to each other over a hologram. A super tactical droid was standing next to them, and with a rip of Anakin's hand, the droid got pulled up to his body and it was cut in half. Grievous and Tyrannus were both shocked when they turned to see Skywalker standing over them from the catwalk like a bitch out for blood. The crossguard ignited, and it was somewhere between crimson and orange. Anakin leapt down the catwalk and pointed his weapon at the two of them. Dooku attempted short talk, and Anakin, even in his frail state, charged the Count. Their sabers connected, and Grievous readied himself, attacking Skywalker from the side. It had been about a month and a half since their previous engagement, and Anakin was not comparable to who he once was. He was weaker and more unbalanced. His saber bashed from side to side, aggressively and without much rhythm, something Grievous took advantage of. but every connection with the highly unstable blade Anakin held made it grow stronger. Not only was the hilt fragile, but the crystal inside was growing more and more powerful by the connection. Anakin swung under and spun around Grievous and Dooku, before getting around them both and reaching out his hand and force crushing Grievous' lungs. Tyrannus moved in to stop the Jedi from hurting his ally, and as he swung down, Anakin raised his metallic forearm and let Dooku cut it off. The lightsaber in the metallic hand fell to the ground, forcing the crystal to bounce against the shabby hilt, and in moments it fractured, sending out a rippling explosion, launching Skywalker and Dooku from their feet. But even through this, Anakin could not let go of Grievous. The droid wheezed in pain, and Anakin yelled from the ground, telling him that he would die for killing his droid. Grievous' eyes exploded and his heart ripped in half, 2 failures that completely crippled his body and killed him almost instantly. Dooku watched Grievous fall to the ground, and prepared to strike the weaker Anakin down. He spun his lightsaber and told Anakin he would pay. On Mustafar, not far from their current staging grounds at Biss, a certain Barriss Offee had discovered her chance for retribution. She was still searching for Anakin and believed she picked up a trace. It was the Separatist Council, and with each of them at lightsaber point, she was able to force the complete shutdown of the droid armies, something that would have her asking Padme for reinforcements because she was kind of alone. Back inside the invisible hand, lightsabers collided and Anakin fell back into a chair, but used it to keep himself afloat. He used most if not all of his energy by killing Grievous. He feared for his own life, but this was a worthy sacrifice. Neither of them knew the entire droid army was being shut down as they fought, and they still believed they were actually fighting for something here. Anakin beat forward with a blue lightsaber taken from the body of Grievous to defend himself. He much preferred the blue blade to the red crossguard, but there was still the benefit from the Atan crystal exploding. It sent debris into Dooku's body. He was still stronger than Anakin at this moment, because he wasn't nearly starved to death, but it provided something. Dooku again pushed Anakin back, and kept him on his back heels until Anakin fell backwards up the steps. His leg split to avoid another strike that could have killed him. Skywalker rolled his leg around and kicked Dooku, before taking a deep breath and summoning everything he had to raise Tyrannus off the ground again. Anakin didn't have the energy to keep this up, but Dooku, no longer in control of his own body, floated above Anakin. The Chosen One took his lightsaber in his still remaining hand and drove it straight through Dooku's body, watching him fall to the ground lifelessly, before Anakin too dropped unconscious. When Anakin woke up weeks later, he was in a medical facility on Coruscant. The Republic fleet led by Windu found Anakin. They checked for life forms on all the ships before they bombarded them into oblivion. They found Anakin's faint life signature and saved him. Windu, even with the help of Plo Koon, rebuilt the astromech Anakin loved so much. So R2 was by his side when he woke up. They were home, everything was alright. There were some serious ramifications, but true evil was destroyed. Anakin missed it, but Palpatine's funeral was held a week before he woke up. Ironically, it would have been everything Sidious hated about his alter ego. They paraded the hero of the Republic around. Chancellor Palpatine saved them from the forces of darkness, and he was a true Republic hero. For generations, Palpatine would be looked at as a master of democracy, the true idealistic visionary of a Senate that ended the Clone War. He would have loathed what the public transformed him into, but that was completely out of his say, because he was an innocent man, stolen and executed by the Separatists, not the Sith Lord who started the war. There would be years of martial law carried out by the Republic, which ensured a slow but effective transition into a time of peace and eventual reunification. Anakin, who had suffered the most at the end of the war, would have the difficult choice to make. Ahsoka was a Jedi once more, only because she vowed to help the Jedi find Anakin when he was lost. And with that, or on top of that, he was also a Jedi Master on the High Council as a result. He decided to stay, and it was because of Ahsoka, but also thanks to Plo and Mace repairing and saving R2 from a complete and total destructive death. Not to mention Anakin felt compelled because he wanted to make his master proud. Of course, logically, Anakin made this decision before he ever learned about the twins. It was a big revelation, but one he handled with delicacy and pride. He wouldn't reject his appointment to becoming a master after learning of this. Instead, he confronted the council, and they made a tough vote, one resulting in Anakin being permitted to remain a Jedi inside the relationship. It also was a vote that allowed him to instruct his twins as Jedi, but not within the order. Plo suggested that Ahsoka be their master, and Anakin couldn't think of a better idea. The end of the war would come with its struggles, but with the Sith defeated forever, the galaxy could transform itself into a united republic, with a Jedi Order who sought to uphold true balance in the Force. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So, the idea of Anakin going on the Invisible Hand, obviously, I think if he fought Dooku alone, I have no doubt that he would be able to beat Dooku. Which is why I made Grievous such an integral part of this video. And I do think that there is a scenario where he could have beat both of them, and that is something I specifically highlighted in this video, is that he could have won this battle by force choking or force crushing Grievous in the beginning. He just wasn't thinking correctly. He had lost Obi-Wan, Palpatine was about to die, and he was like reacting out of instinct, and something that is, as you see in Revenge of the Sith, something that costs him dearly. And that's what happens to him here. I more or less wanted Anakin to experience the whole trip through the dark side in the story that he goes through in Revenge of the Sith, without including the nightmares that Palpatine gives him, and also without having anybody but himself to go through it with. I think given enough time, because this takes place over the course of about a month and a half, I think Anakin could go fully through the arc of the dark side instead of having to do it like in 24 years, like he does in the canon timeline, where he's able to go full dark side inside the pit, come out, fight Dooku and Grievous as a Darksider with a crossguard, and then find his way to victory, and then eventually coming around to fully being a truly balanced Jedi in the end. More like a Mace Windu, if you will. So, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.